The sky was gray the morning they dragged her to the gallows, a girl of 17 barefoot wrists, bound in frayed rope, stumbling through the dust-choked main street of Hollow Bend. Her dress was once yellow. Now it clung to her skin like a torn flag smeared with soot, sweat, and something darker. Blood, maybe, or shame. The townsfolk lined the boardwalks in silence, their eyes darting from the girl to the noose swinging gently in the breeze. Behind her, Sheriff Dunley spat into the dirt and signaled the deputies forward. They pulled her roughly up the wooden steps of the scaffold, where the preacher already stood, eyes sunken, lips pursed. His Bible trembled in his hands. "Mercy," someone whispered. No one responded. The charge was murder. Of a man named Ezra Collings, a rich landowner known as the master of the Briarhorn estate. She'd been his servant, a nobody, a girl without kin, without a future. And now, without a chance. They said she poisoned his coffee with wolfsbane. They said she confessed, though no one saw the confession. They said justice had been served swift and fair. But no one saw what happened behind those estate walls. No one heard what she heard. No one felt what she endured, until a voice rang out from the crowd, firm, female, and loud enough to freeze even the wind. "Hold." Heads turned. Gasps scattered like dry leaves. There, stepping between deputies and townsfolk, came a figure in crimson satin and black lace, eyes rimmed with kohl, chin lifted like a blade. The brothel owner, Widow Calhoun. And in that instant, everything changed. The crowd parted as if the earth itself had opened. Widow Calhoun moved forward with the grace of a woman who had walked through fire and come out scented of smoke. She was no stranger to scandal. Some said she ran her house like a queen ran a court, with velvet gloves and iron rules. Others whispered of secrets traded between silken sheets, of judges, ranchers, and men with blood on their boots, who owed her favor. But no one had ever seen her like this. She stepped onto the gallows platform, not waiting for permission. Sheriff Dunley's hand twitched toward his gun, then stopped. She met his stare and didn't blink. "I will speak," she said, voice clear, steady, and soaked in something that made the preacher lower his Bible without a word. The girl, still on her knees, looked up in disbelief. Her face was bruised, one eye nearly swollen shut. But when she saw the widow, something passed between them. Recognition, and something else. Fear. "I know what happened in that house," the widow said, "because I sent her there." A gasp rippled through the crowd. "Her name is Clara," Calhoun continued. "Not the girl, not the maid, Clara Langridge. Her mother worked in my kitchen before the cough took her. Clara had no place to go, and Ezra Collings made an offer, said he'd give her room and board, called it charity." She turned to the crowd. Ezra Collings never gave anything without taking more. Sheriff Dunley stepped forward, voice taut. "This ain't a court, madam. The trial's done. Justice has spoken." But the widow didn't flinch. Is it justice if the girl was never allowed to speak? Silence. "Is it justice," she said louder now, "if the law listens only to the ones with land and money and men with guns?" A murmur began among the townsfolk. The saloon owner nodded slowly. Mrs. Alden, the schoolteacher, pulled her shawl tighter but did not look away. Calhoun turned back to Clara. "Tell them what he did." Clara shook her head, trembled. "I can't," she whispered. "They won't believe me." "They will," the widow said, "because I'll speak too." She faced the crowd again. "Ezra Collings was a client of mine, a frequent one. He liked girls who looked younger than they were, and when I stopped letting him through my doors, he found other ways. He found Clara." The preacher's hands dropped to his sides. Sheriff Dunley paled. "Are you admitting," the sheriff said, "to running a den of vice and protecting criminals?" I'm admitting, she replied, that your town runs on secrets, and I'm tired of being the only one forced to carry them. The silence turned heavier than stone. Men shifted in their boots. Wives looked to their husbands, uncertain. Clara's eyes stayed fixed on the widow, as though she were the only solid thing left in the world. The noose swayed above her like a question yet to be answered. I warned him, the widow said, each word like a dropped stone in water. I told Ezra that if he touched her again, I would burn every lie he'd built to the ground. He laughed, told me the town would never listen to the likes of me. She looked at the preacher. He said, your God turned his face from girls like Clara. The preacher opened his mouth, then closed it. No scripture came. Calhoun stepped down from the gallows and stood before the crowd, eyes sweeping them like a judge reading souls. Didn't any of you wonder why the doctor never signed Ezra's death record? Why the undertaker kept the casket shut? She pulled a folded page from her sleeve. This is his ledger. I took it before they locked the house. Every payment, every name. Some of you are in here. Gasps. One man stepped back into the crowd. Calhoun raised the paper. You want justice? Then you better look it in the eye. Clara didn't kill a man. She escaped a monster. Sheriff Dunley drew in a breath, slow and unsure. It's still hearsay, the girl confessed. Clara stirred, voice barely audible. They made me. The deputy, he held me down, said I'd hang anyway, so better to confess and die fast. All eyes turned to the deputy in question, Reese, a wiry man with sweat already running down his neck. He took a step back, hand near his holster, but no one followed. Don't you lie, girl, he snapped. She's not lying, said a voice from the back. The crowd parted again. A tall figure in a weathered duster stepped forward. Silver in his beard, rifle slung across his back. Marshal Graven, long thought, retired. Known for speaking only when the stakes were higher than the gallows themselves. I was in Hollow Bend the night Ezra died, Graven said. I saw the bruises. I saw the room. And I saw the poison bottle with the deputy's fingerprints. Reese turned pale. That's enough, the sheriff barked, voice cracking. But it was already too late. Reese stumbled backward, one foot missing the edge of the platform. He reached for his weapon, but the rifle's click stopped him cold. Marshal Graven didn't raise it. He didn't need to. The threat hung in the air, like thunder too close to breathe. I suggest you step down, Graven said evenly. Sheriff Dunley's face had lost all color. You can't take over my... I'm not taking over, the marshal said. I'm holding you to the oath you swore, if you still remember it. For a long beat, no one moved. Then Dunley slowly nodded, stepped back, and lowered his eyes. Reese, still breathing hard, let his hand fall from his holster. Calhoun stepped beside Clara and undid the ropes at her wrists. They fell to the ground like dead snakes. Clara stood wobbled but upright. Her eyes scanned the crowd. Some faces turned away. Others, for the first time, held something close to shame. The widow lifted Clara's chin. You owe no one your silence anymore. Clara swallowed. He used to come into my room at night, said if I told, they'd hang me for theft, for lies. He said girls like me don't get to say no. The words rang through the yard. No one interrupted. Not now. I didn't mean to kill him, Clara continued, but when he reached for me again, I fought. He fell, hit his head on the hearth. I ran. I didn't even know he was dead until they came for me. Marshal Graven nodded slowly. That's not murder. That's survival. The widow turned to the preacher. Well? The old man cleared his throat, voice trembling. There'll be no hanging here today, not while God watches. But the law, someone shouted. The law, the marshal interrupted, exists to serve justice, not to cover it in blood. A murmur of agreement rose, cautious but building. The noose swung untouched in the breeze. Then Clara did something no one expected. She stepped to the edge of the platform, took the rope in her hand, and dropped it to the floor. "I don't want revenge," she said, "just to be seen." The crowd was still. Then, slowly, one by one, people removed their hats, a gesture of respect, of reckoning. The saloon owner, the barber, even the banker who'd once denied her mother a loan. Marshal Graven exhaled, and just like that, the execution turned into a reckoning. For a moment, it seemed as though peace had found Hollow Bend. The girl was spared, the town humbled, the monster named, but justice in the West is rarely clean, and truth once freed spills more than it saves. That night, the widow Calhoun sat alone in her parlor, oil lamp flickering shadows across red wallpaper. Clara slept upstairs, safe for the first time in months. Outside, the town was quiet. But not everyone was at ease. A stone crashed through the brothel's front window. Calhoun stood without flinching. Another stone followed, this one with a message wrapped in twine. She picked it up. The note read, "You brought shame to good men. You'll pay for it." By morning, the town had split like dry timber. Some said Clara should have hanged, that girls like her always brought ruin, that Collings was no saint, but still a man of land, of structure. Others whispered that justice had come late but true, that Calhoun's words had peeled the town open like a rotten peach, and now they had to taste what was inside. Marshal Graven stayed close, but he too was receiving threats. Anonymous notes pinned to his door, the word traitor carved into his saddle. And the sheriff, he was nowhere to be found. The jail sat unlocked. The deputy Reese had vanished. But it wasn't until the third morning, when blood was found near the old well outside town, that people began to murmur again, not about justice, but about revenge. Clara saw it in their eyes as she passed through town, collecting bread or soap from the general store. She'd been freed by rope, but not by memory. Her every step echoed the question they wouldn't speak: why is she still here? One evening, Clara returned from the bakery to find the front door of the brothel ajar. Inside, the parlor had been ransacked, pillows torn, chairs overturned, liquor bottles shattered across the floor. A warning? Not a robbery. Upstairs, the widow stood in her bedroom, untouched but unmoved. Her eyes were fixed on the mirror, where someone had written in soot, "Silence her, or we will." Graven arrived within the hour, rifle across his back, boots coated in dust. He paced the hallway like a storm cloud ready to break. "They won't stop," he muttered. "You struck a match under years of filth. Now they're crawling out to kill the flame." The widow didn't flinch, then let them try. But Clara wasn't made of iron. That night she packed a satchel quietly. A loaf of bread, a pocket knife, her mother's old scarf. She was slipping through the kitchen door when the widow stopped her. "You think running will fix this?" Calhoun asked. Arms crossed. Clara turned, eyes glassy. "They won't stop until someone pays." "Then let it be someone who deserves it," the widow said. "Not you." But fate in Hollow Bend was already writing its next chapter. That same night, the townsfolk awoke to smoke. The church was on fire. Flames licked the steeple like a devil's tongue. People poured into the street, forming lines with buckets, shouting for the preacher, for order. But amidst the chaos, someone noticed on the charred front door, painted in red ash, "She is the fire." The widow and Clara watched from the edge of the crowd, faces lit by orange light. The message wasn't for the church, it was for them. And the town had heard it loud and clear. By morning, fear had curdled into something sharper. Marshal Graven stood before the smoking ruin of the chapel, jaw set like granite. "This wasn't anger," he said to the widow. "It was ritual, public, a message carved in fire." "They want her gone," Calhoun replied. "Or buried," he nodded. and they're losing patience. That afternoon, a town meeting was called, not in the courthouse or the saloon, but beneath the old oak tree on the hill where vigilantes once gathered in darker times. Clara wasn't invited, nor was Calhoun, but word reached them all the same. They say if she's not gone by sundown tomorrow, the widow said softly, they'll take her. Clara stood silent a long time. Then she whispered, maybe I should go. Maybe I bring too much shadow. The widow touched her cheek. No, you bring light. It's their eyes that fear it. But even light can be smothered if left alone. That night, as rain began to fall over Hollow Bend, 3 men rode to the edge of town. Faces wrapped in kerchiefs, rifles strapped across their backs. They didn't speak as they dismounted. They moved toward the brothel in silence, boots sinking into wet earth, but someone was already waiting. The front door opened before they could knock. Marshal Graven stepped out, rifle in hand, calm as winter frost. We done pretending? He asked. One man raised his weapon. Graven fired first. The shot cracked through the night like thunder through glass. One rider dropped, the others fled. Behind Graven, a dozen townsfolk stepped from the shadows, shopkeepers, mothers, even the blacksmith's boy, each holding lanterns or makeshift clubs. People who had listened, people who had changed. For the first time, Hollow Bend stood between a girl and her grave, not as judges, but as defenders. Morning broke slow and gray over Hollow Bend. Rain still hung in the air, the ground damp and soft beneath wagon wheels. The town, scarred and shaken, began to stir, not with gossip, but with a kind of quiet awe. Something had shifted, something they couldn't yet name. The fire was out. The attackers had been stopped, but peace was not what followed. It was reckoning. Sheriff Dunley reappeared just after dawn, hat in hand, face pale. He rode into town alone, no badge on his chest. He stopped at the gallows, now stripped of rope, and stood there for nearly an hour before stepping into the jailhouse. He left the door open behind him. At noon, he walked into the saloon and laid a folded note on the bar. I resign, it read. I was a coward. I knew about Ezra. I knew what he did. I just let it happen. He didn't stay to be forgiven. He left Hollow Bend that evening and never returned. Clara remained. With Graven's backing and the widow's roof, she took a place in the community, not as a victim, not as a warning, but as something harder to define. A survivor, a witness, a reminder. She began helping at the schoolhouse, teaching younger girls to read, speaking when others could not. Some still looked at her with unease, but fewer each day. One morning, as she stepped outside the brothel with a basket of bread, she found a package on the steps. Inside it, a ribbon, sky blue with no note. She smiled faintly. Later that week, the preacher returned to the hill where the church once stood. This time he brought lumber. Volunteers came quietly, some who'd whispered before, some who'd thrown stones. They laid beams, raised walls, rebuilt what had burned. And not once did anyone call it her fault again. Clara's name began to change in the mouths of others. She was no longer that girl, no longer the servant. In letters from nearby towns, she was Miss Langridge, the teacher. In whispered stories shared on porches at dusk, she was the girl who lived when no one else would have. Even those who still doubted found themselves silenced not by argument, but by example. She carried herself without fear now, not because the danger was gone, but because she'd already faced it and chosen to stay. One evening she visited the edge of town where Ezra Collings had once ruled from his estate. The house stood empty, windows boarded, fields gone to seed. Weeds had swallowed the path, but Clara stepped through them, like one walking through memory. She stood before the door and placed a small note between the slats. It read, "I forgive you, but I will not forget." Then she turned and walked away, her back never once bending, her head never once bowed. At the brothel, the widow had turned her rooms into refuge. No longer a place of transaction, but of sanctuary. Girls with nowhere else came quietly, sometimes in the dead of night, guided by rumor and fear. They found blankets, warm meals in hands that did not grab but held. And Calhoun, once scorned as a madam, was now something else entirely. A protector. Marshal Graven remained as well. The town offered him the sheriff's badge, but he refused. "I'll guard the truth," he said. "Let someone else wear the tin." Instead, he built a post at the edge of town, half office, half shelter. He trained 2 young deputies, neither of whom carried cruelty in their belts. He taught them to ask questions, to listen, and to remember that justice isn't the same as law. Seasons turned, Hollow Bend softened. By spring, wildflowers bloomed where the gallows once stood. No scaffold, no rope, just a flat patch of earth, quiet and green. Children played there now, chasing each other under skies that no longer carried smoke or judgment. Clara often walked by on her way to the schoolhouse. Some days she paused, not to remember the noose, but to remind herself that it hadn't won. That a town could change, that people could too. She was older now in spirit, still 17 in years, but no longer a girl. She spoke with purpose, moved without fear. And when she entered a room, the silence that once followed her had turned into respect. One afternoon, she found a small box left on her school desk. Inside it, a key, old and tarnished. No. But she recognized it. It was the key to her old room at the Briarhorn estate. She never went back, but she kept the key. As for the widow, her name began appearing in letters from nearby counties. Requests for help, shelter, aid. Some offered money. Some offered thanks. A few offered apologies. She accepted all but the last. "I don't need sorry," she said. "I need better." And better began to grow. The preacher preached less fire, more mercy. The banker opened a fund for orphans and widows. The townsfolk, once blind to what happened behind closed doors, now looked closer, asked more, trusted slower. And above them all, Hollow Bend stood quieter than it had in decades, not silenced by fear, but calmed by truth. It wasn't perfect, but it was watching now, and it was learning. The rope was never the real danger. It was the silence, the hush that falls when truth dares to speak, and the world chooses not to listen. Clara Langridge's story wasn't carved into the walls of Hollow Bend, nor did it make the papers in larger towns. There were no monuments built, no names etched in bronze. But her story lingered in the quiet nods of shopkeepers, in the careful questions of schoolgirls, in the way doors that were once slammed shut began to crack open just enough for someone to walk through. Justice, in the West, was never just about laws. It was about courage, about standing when no one else will, about saying enough in a world where too many have whispered, "That's just the way things are." Clara didn't change Hollow Bend with fire or vengeance. She changed it by surviving, by not letting what was done to her be the final word, and in doing so, she gave others permission not to forget, but to begin again. The widow Calhoun, with her red silk and steel heart, showed a town what strength looks like when wrapped in compassion. She stood where it was most dangerous to stand, not behind a badge or a pulpit, but beside a girl no one else would claim. And she taught them that reputation means nothing if it's not used to shield the vulnerable. Marshal Graven, weathered and tired, reminded the town that the law must serve people, not power. That silence in the face of cruelty is not order, it is betrayal. And that a gun on your hip means little if your soul stays quiet when it matters most. We like to think heroes ride in with thunder, that justice comes with fanfare and flags, but in truth, it arrives quietly. It walks on bare feet. It speaks in trembling voices. It waits at the back of courtrooms and gallows yards, hoping anyone will see it. And when it finally finds a voice, it doesn't shout. It says, "I am still here, and I remember." Because memory is the first stone in the rebuilding of anything worth saving.